Friends, this show is completely unrehearsed. The only part of it that can be done over is the announcements. Now, just a couple of minutes ago, we started filming it, and the announcer gave the title. Stop, world, I want to get on. And some woman shrieked at the title, and we had to do it over. I hope it appears that funny to you. I must tell you, first of all, about some things that happened to me. I was preaching not very long ago, and I noticed down in the front pew a mother with a 3 or 4-year-old boy, and she was trying to keep him very quiet. But after I had talked for 15 minutes that must have seemed 15 hours to him, he tugged at his mother's sleeve, and he says, "Mommy, is it really that hard to get to heaven?" And another little boy, when he went to confession, he had in the back of his mind the commandments. And he could be heard going through the commandments in one fashion or another, and then after he had named them to himself, then he would begin the confession of sins. And he was saying, no strange gods before me. No, I didn't adore any strange gods. Thou shalt keep holy the name of the Lord. I cursed a couple of times, Father, and keep holy the Sabbath day. I went to Mass every Sunday. Honor the father and mother. I disobeyed my mother about 18 times and my father about 6 times. Thou shalt not kill. I didn't kill anybody. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Sister told me to skip that. I remember going into one classroom and saying to a little boy, "Tell me what you have to do to get forgiveness of sins." He said, "You have to sin first." Well, you heard the title. The title was actually inspired by a show that was here on Broadway a few years ago. Stop, world, I want to get off. Now we're changing that to stop, world, I want to get on. Why are we changing it? Obviously, stop, world, I want to get off is because people are just sick of living. Our point is that perhaps never before were men so concerned with the world as they are at the present time. It has always been a concern, of course. Remember Shakespeare? All the world's a stage, and men and women merely actors. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Wordsworth, he was somewhat disgusted with it. The world is too much with us, late and soon. And I'm sure that Thomas Hood, if he had lived in our times, would have said, "Stop, world, I want to get off," because he wrote, "The world is a wilderness, and every tree bears the burden of our tears." Those are the old views. But I wonder if ever in human history, the world, I do not mean the spirit of the world, just the world itself and all that that word can mean, was ever so much the concern of hearts as at the present time. Just let me give you some examples of how the world has been discovered, why it is a concern. First of all, our age has discovered humanity. Humanity. The world is one. We're all born of one blood. We're very much concerned about the gap that exists between the rich nations and the poor nations. It burdens our consciences that by the year 2000, according to the UN, it will be necessary for Asia to have 4 times the amount of food it has at the present time. Latin America will have to have 4 times the amount of food as now, and Africa 3 times. So humanity concerns us. Then we have another interest in the world. We have the interest of science, technology. Our knowledge has probably increased more in the last 100 years than it did in, well, all previous history. It almost seems as if to our generation has been given the capacity to unlock all of the secrets of nature. Remember the poet who said, "I drew the bolt of nature's secrecies." One can imagine all the secrets of nature pouring out. So that we live not just in a world of gadgetry, we live in this beautiful world of technology. And finally, the world has become our concern through what might be called world involvement. In other words, there is a fondness today for doing social work, helping the minorities, bettering the inner city, helping those that are socially disinherited. Young men and women are dedicated today, as they never have been, to all of these social causes. They want to be, as they say, involved in the world. I remember during the council, I was waiting one day for the bus that took us to the council, and I saw a street cleaner in front of the hotel where I was staying, and I went up to him and I said, "How long will you work today?" He said, 12 hours. "What time did you get up?" He said, 4 o'clock this morning. And I said, "What is your duty?" He says, "Nothing but just sweeping the gutters." About a mile of gutters here in Rome. "How much do you earn?" He told me it was really a trivial wage. I said, "Tell me your philosophy of life." And he said, "You're going to the council, aren't you?" "Yes." "You're going to make important decisions for the church and the world." "Yes." He said, "But if I clean my gutters with a greater dedication than you do that work, the Lord is far more pleased with me." That's right. He saw that we have work in the world, and it can be a dedicated and divine and holy work. Now, this is the good side. There's a kind of a bad side to this, too. I'm going to mention it for just a few minutes, and then I'm going to get back again to the good side. This concern with the world is called secularism. Its bad side is that some would like to do away with the divine and the sacred. We've had a series of thinkers in our day that believe that in order to uphold the world, one has to destroy the divine. That's one of the reasons, incidentally, for the God is dead movement. These poor thinkers believe that in order to make room for the world, you got to get rid of God. Bultmann It says in order to make room for the Christian message, you have to get rid of the historical Christ, practically. And we have the author of Secular City. He practically identifies the secular city and the kingdom of God. And even in the field of religion itself, today the holy are on the defensive. This world spirit has gotten hold of us to such an extent that many do not like the holy. I may tell you that it's gotten so bad that when any of you people see us priests on our knees, you ask us if we lost our contact lenses. Well, that's enough of that. So now let's get back to the good side of the world. These are great ideas. This spirit is magnificent. But who are most responsible for these ideas? Oh, secular-minded men? I will not give you the three names at once. First one was John the 23rd. Who did more for our love of humanity today than this man? Who? Auguste Comte, with his supposed love of humanity, never wrote a line comparable to John's love of the poor. He opened the council, brought the world into it. Protestants, Orthodox, Buddhists, Hindus, communists, everyone was welcome. As one poor workman said about the Vatican one day, he's not interested in politics at all, except inasmuch as politics is related to us poor people. That's right. He was the one who made the world conscious of the love of humanity, even when, for example, we used our science to send an astronaut around the earth. Because I remember when that happened, John the 23rd quoted the book of Genesis and said, God said, rule over the earth and subject it. He saw this young American astronaut as indicating the great scientific progress of mankind. No wonder his last words were, Lord, that they may be one. And then that human side of John, great big fat man he could reach out those great arms of his almost like the fleshy columns of Bernini to bring all mankind within his grasp. One day he went into a prison, visited the prisoners, and as he passed one cell, he said, who's in there? The warden says, that's the death cell. That man in there killed his wife. John spoke to him from outside the bars. He wouldn't answer, Pope John. So Pope John said to the warden, let me in. And the man faced the wall, would not turn around. John said to him, young man. Oh, yes, he said, what is he in here for? And the warden said, he killed his wife. John said, young man, I've never been married. But do you know that if I were married, I might have killed my wife, too? With that, the prisoner turned around and embraced John. This is the humanity that he taught us to love. Now let's go to science and the world of technology. Who has done most to elevate the dignity of science, to give it a new view of things, and almost to write a scientific genesis. Who? Teilhard de Chardin. This great French scientist, as a little boy, was interested in rocks. And he was interested in rocks somehow or other because he saw the creative hand of God inside of the rocks. He grew up with a great devotion to what was the favorite devotion of his mother, called the Heart of Christ, but he got quite beyond the pious conception of his mother. As he traveled around the world many times, excavated, dug, came up with prehistoric men, was inducted into the great scientific academies of the world. There was one great notion that obsessed Teilhard. It was the notion of an arrow being directed toward its target. First of all, there has to be a mind that directs that arrow. And there has to be a target fixed before the arrow is ever shot. Let that arrow stand for the evolution of the universe. And he believed in the evolution of the universe. But it's working toward a target. And somewhere there was an archer that shot it. So Teilhard de Chardin saw the whole universe ablaze with Christ. All things were made by the power of his word. All things were for him. And so deeply did this embed itself in the scientific concept of the universe that one day in the Gobi Desert, he could not read Mass. And he wrote this prayer. Since I, your priest, O Lord, have this day neither bread, nor wine, nor altar, I am going to spread my hands over the entire universe and take its immensity as the matter of my sacrifice. Is not the infinite circle of things the ultimate host that will be transformed? Is not the seething crucible wherein mingle and boil up all the operations of living and cosmic substances the chalice of pain that you desire us to sanctify? So let there be repeated again today and tomorrow and forever, until the transformation shall have been exhaustively effected in the divine words, this is my body. I wish I had other texts. Time, but I have only 4 minutes. To develop the thought of Teilhard, I might someday give his whole theology of science. But here was a man who brought science into the forefront of modern thinking for all men who love the world, because within this cosmos was sacred. And just as John saw Christ in all humanity, here was a man who saw Christ also in everything that was scientific and cosmic. And finally, who gave us world involvement? A Lutheran minister, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A brilliant young man who said I would hate to live to be 40, and he never did. Was invited here to America to give lectures. He said, this is not my place. With the Nazi persecution going on, I must go back again to Germany. He resisted the Nazis and was put in prison. And just as John saw Christ in all humanity, Teilhard de Chardin saw Christ in the cosmos, so Dietrich de Bonhoeffer saw him involved in everything that was worldly, in every kind of social service, in law, in medicine, in everything. He left, he said, mentioned a couple of words that have been taken up by people who live by quotations. He spoke of a religionless religion, which unthinking people translate into a philosophy of life. By religionless religion, he simply meant that it shouldn't be too churchy. In other words, that the church should become involved. Here are his exact words as he was in prison. Just as in Christ the reality of God entered the reality of the world. That was the incarnation. So too that which is Christian is to be found in the world, the holy in the profane. So I would not speak of God on the borders of life, but at its center, in its life, in its prosperity. God is the beyond in the midst of life. And Christians must participate in the sufferings of Christ in this worldly life. And so he said that you never can look at the world without God, and you never can look at God without the world. This was his notion. And he died for it. And on April the 9th, 1945, the Nazis came. Do I have 20 seconds or a minute and 20? The Nazis came to him and told him that he was to be hanged. The Nazi doctor saw him in his prison cell in prayer. He spent 45 minutes every morning in meditation, 45 minutes every night. He was led to the gallows. The gallows swung 6 o'clock on that April 9th morning, 1945. And the doctor who attended him said, in all of my 40 years of medicine, I have never seen a man so calm, so resigned, and so submissive to the world of God, to the will of God. This was Bonhoeffer, the real Bonhoeffer. And so the world is a great and a good place to live in. But who made it? God is dead men? No, to make room for the world. These are the men who made the world. And the world is worth living in, and the world is worth saving. If I could sing for you after that telecast, I would sing, it's a great, big, wide, wonderful world we live in. Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living. The vast white beauty of the season of winter reaches gracefully toward the sleeping mountains, and there, in the beauty of its flowing crystal sculptures, we miss seeing the simple presence of color. Even our warm, wild creatures know it's not easy finding green under a blanket of snow, but it's nice to have a friend to help you look. It is in this season of winter that we celebrate the Bethlehem birth of the child Jesus. Bishop Sheen says, "It was a breakthrough in time that changed our world, for we found a belief that is the love of the truth."
Unbelief is dread of the truth about ourselves. That's unbelief. Faith is a willingness to face the truth about ourselves. And when we do, well, once that original dread is overcome and we admit the breakthrough, then we're changed. And then our mind is illumined, our will is strengthened, we have a great joy and happiness.
She's lovely, isn't she? Beautiful. Hi there. I'm Cameron Mitchell, and I want to wish happy holidays to all of you. Christmas is our time of love and goodwill, a moment in the portrait of history when a bright silver star high in the night sky gave off a close and holy light, and the world in solemn stillness lay to hear the angels sing. Christmas is also a time of giving, and we've wrapped up a special present just for you, filled with hugs, kisses, joy, hope, and sunshine. It's a Christmas gift of love from a friend of yours, Fulton Sheen. He calls it Superman and Christmas, a unique comparison of fantasy and truth, a breakthrough in history, blessed by the birth of a child of grace, peace, and love.
Friends, a mother told her little boy to go into the parlor and turn on television. He was distracting the mother. And he turned the dial, and he caught a picture of me on television. He ran out, said to his mother, "Ma, Superman." Well, here is Superman in a new costume with even a new title tonight, Superman and Christmas. What has Superman got to do with Christmas? You know what Superman does, Batman. And then these men, we have mother planets. Isn't it interesting how many of those we have in our world today who, first of all, seem to come from somewhere else, just as Superman does. And quickly he changes his costume. He goes into a telephone booth or a closet, just as an ordinary mortal, and he puts on the form and the habit of Superman. And then once he's broke through with this great power of his, then he begins to do wonders. He relieves us in our afflictions, helps damsels in distress, defends those who have been persecuted, the lover of the poor and the socially disinherited. And this intensely pleases the American people. Why is it that programs of this kind are so popular? I think there's a subconscious reason, almost an unconscious one. First of all, we know that the help that we need is not just among us ordinary mortals and the affairs of daily life. If we are to have the inner strength that we need, it has to come from outside. We've never expressed this, perhaps in so many words. but we know the need of it. And Superman, Batman, and men from other worlds, they satisfy our needs, at least from the point of view of imagination. They give us what we lack. We know that of and by ourselves we are not enough. Just as the music that we love is the music we already have in our own hearts, so too the amusements that we like are the unconscious expressions of hidden desires. Superman is the desire for Christmas. It should not be hard for our generation to understand Christmas. Now, I'm going to show you how Superman and Christmas are somewhat alike. I really didn't need to use this blackboard tonight, but I'm going to use it just for this one illustration so my angel can clean it. It would be terrible to have a Christmas show and not use my angel. The Superman comes from outside. There's a kind of a breakthrough. Is that clear? Oh, yes, it gets clearer, doesn't it? As you're right. This is unusual chalk. Invisible chalk. First, there's a breakthrough. And then, because he helps others, there is a kind of a renovation, a strengthening, an aiding. Now, Christmas is just this. First, there is a breakthrough. And instead of someone going into a closet and taking on the form and the substance of a Superman, the breakthrough this time is the God coming down to earth, breaking through time, splitting it so much so that from that time on to this, it's BC and AD. But there's this difference from Superman, and this is very important. Superman goes from weakness to power. The breakthrough of Christmas is from power to weakness. You saw the picture of the crib when the show began. Here is infinity and littleness. See, this isn't a man getting strong. This is a God becoming weak. He who made the world is in the world, even rejected by it. He who made the nest is nestled therein. The tiny little hands that are not quite long enough to reach the huge heads of the cattle are the hands that hold the reins, that steer the sun and moon and stars in their courses. He's wrapped in swaddling bands. Divinity, enclosed, wrapped, confined, cabin, cribbed, helpless as a babe. What a difference between Superman and this breakthrough. Not a manifestation of power to please the pride of man, but humility, to humble man's pride. This idea of a God becoming a man that you saw there in the crib is something that's very hard for us to realize. Just suppose you love dogs, and you were sorrowful for the way dogs were treated by some masters or neglected. And you had the power to dispossess yourself of your body. But you could do with your soul what you wanted. And you took that soul of yours and you put it into the body of a dog. And when you did that, you would resolve, but rarely to exceed the limitations of that dog organism. What a humiliation that would be. You know that you had a mind that could write poetry and that could study science and absorb literature and understand Dante and Aquinas, and yet here you were in the body of a dog. And then there would be another humiliation. And that other humiliation would be because you went into the organism of a dog, you would have to associate with other dogs, knowing all the while that you were better, that you were a man. You think it humbling to become a dog just simply to give dogs examples of good conduct? Well, what do you think it is for this breakthrough? Not going into a closet, but going into a stable and a crib. Being bound with swaddling bands. That's the difference in the Superman. Weakness instead of power. And then the other difference is that Superman, when he comes to this earth of ours to do his wonders, only touches the environment. He touches what is outside of man. In other words, I've never seen chalk like that before. Angel, where did you get it? You've got to wait for an effect. It's like telling a funny story. It just doesn't happen all at once. All the Superman does is to change circumstances on the outside. But he does not touch man on the inside. That's the difference. And when God becomes man, when we have Christmas, he leaves circumstances very much the way they are. He leaves Roman soldiers parading through the streets. The same problems. Pain and suffering and hunger and so forth. But he begins reforming the hearts of men. And once they are reformed, then if they live according to his way, then they'll do away with these boring things of indigence and suffering. So the God-man works in the heart of a man. It's very much as if, now I wonder if my angel will use an invisible eraser. Now, this internal operation of God when he comes to this earth may be likened to a plague. Suppose that there was something in the world today like the Black Death during the Middle Ages. Remember, that wiped out 1/3 of the population of Europe? And suppose a great scientist found a remedy for that plague. And he made the remedy available to the whole human race. And there would be some who would come to be relieved. Others might not. Now, that's just exactly what happened when God came to this earth. We're all willing to have our circumstances changed. We like to have more money. Maybe live in a different house. But do we want our thinking changed? Do we want our loves changed? And the God-man who came to this earth came for the remedy for moral and spiritual plagues. Came to make us happy on the inside. Not everyone wants it. He came into his own, and his own received him not. Now this is Christmas in terms of the Superman. Now let me reduce it to a concrete case. The breakthrough, how he operates through what we call his grace. It means an illumination of the intellect and a strengthening of character. I did a great deal of work in my life in Soho Square district of London, which is the international area of London. And in one church there, because I was an American, I had to get up early and read the first Mass. The English sleep late. Well, this was Christmas morning. Christmas. And that night there had been a heavy London fog. Believe me, our smogs here in New York are nothing compared to the fog of London. When I opened the door, a limp figure fell in. It was a young woman. She'd been asleep against the door. It was almost frozen. And I said, how did you happen to be here? She said, I don't know, Father. I said, oh, Father? Yes, she said, I used to be a Catholic, but not anymore. I said, how did you happen to be here? Well, she said, I don't know, I was a bit drunk. Well, I said, men often drink because they like the stuff, and women drink because they don't like something else. What didn't you like? Well, she said, I didn't like the three men. She says that I was going with, and they were beginning to find it out. I was playing false to them. So I got drunk. What is your name? She told me her name, pointing to a billboard on the Cross and Blackwell Jam office building across the way. I said, is that your picture there? Yes, she says, I'm the leading lady in that musical comedy. Well, I went in and made her a cup of coffee, and I said, come back now this afternoon. And she said, I will come back on one condition. That you don't ask me to go to confession. I said, all right. She said, I want you to promise me faithfully that you will not ask me to go to confession. I said, I promise you faithfully not to ask you to go to confession. So she came back that afternoon before matinee, and I said, we have a Rembrandt and a Van Dyck in this church. Would you like to see them? She said, yes. So as we walked down the side aisle, we passed the confessional box. I pushed her in. I didn't ask her to go. I always keep my promises. Well, she went to communion. She was there month after month, and then she became a nun in London. And she's still living as a nun. Now here you see the breakthrough. Not the breakthrough into a crib, but the breakthrough, well, into a stable. A heart that's a stable. And then when the breakthrough happened, there was a change. A renovation of heart and character. So that she was no longer what she was before. It was not the outside that was changed. It was the inside. Now, that's what Christmas is. Christmas is not just something that has happened, it's something that is happening. And some of us, we're afraid of it. It's very much like people go through life not knowing they have cancer. They're unhappy, they're sick, they're a bit miserable, but they don't know why. If a doctor tells them that they have cancer, then their whole attitude toward life changes. They may be even able eventually to find a remedy. So people stay away from this babe of Christmas. They stay away from Christ. They're a bit afraid. Unbelief is dread of the truth about ourselves. That's unbelief. Faith is a willingness to face the truth about ourselves. And when we do, well, once that original dread is overcome and we admit the breakthrough, then we're changed. And then our mind is illumined, our will is strengthened, we have a great joy and happiness. So I say, therefore, it's hard for some people to accept Christmas. But I'm going to give you a tip, because I'm talking to everybody. I always do on television. If you do not want to start there, in that stable, with the full recognition of that breakthrough, I will tell you where to start. Start loving your fellow man. Start loving your neighbor. And begin to love him, not just because of what he can do for you, or because of any pleasure anyone gives you. But just love him as a fellow man, and then eventually you begin to see that he's a creature of God. The only unhappy people in this world are the people who are selfish. And I have known in this world some people who just loved humanity. Won't you begin to love really and truly? Please do that for me, and you will eventually come to know the true meaning of Christmas. Then you'll have a Merry Christmas.
Happy Christmas, Bishop Sheen. Happy Christmas. In your presence, there is a benediction and a grace. In your memory, we have lit the candles of fellowship and hope, knowing that our experiences of unity in human relationships are more compelling than the concepts, fears, and prejudices which divide us. These tiny flames must burn in our hearts all year long. Happy Christmas, Bishop Sheen.
Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.
Friends, I was preaching in a certain church over a period of about 2 months. And every Sunday there was put in the collection box an envelope that had written on it, I owe you 1 week $35 for a sermon. Another week, I owe you $15. Another week, an envelope, I owe you $40. This went on for 4 or 5 weeks. And it was always an IOU. One day, there was put in the collection box an envelope containing the sum of all of the IOUs, amounting to about $220. Well, I was rather delighted that the talks were that good. But the next week, there was put in an envelope, and it read, you owe me 40. You have no idea what this show is about, do you? The clown is right. It's about play. Work and play. You remember the story of the boy on an airplane that was causing a commotion running up and down the aisles, and the stewardess said to him, little boy, would you like to go outside and play? The idea for this particular telecast came to me from an experience that I had as a boy, and many times. There was a vacant lot near where I lived, and a number of us boys used to play baseball on that lot. And maybe 1 or 2 times a week, the game would be interrupted by my mother calling me. And she would say, I want you to go to the grocery store and buy this and this and this. And I would always say, well, Mother, listen, why can't you wait until the game is over? She said, what difference does it make whether you're running to a grocery store or running around the bases? You know, I never could think of an answer. But later on, when I went to school, I found an answer. She probably knows the answer already because, please God, she's in heaven. But, oh no, I won't tell you where I found the answer. Later on, I may tell you. But I did find the answer. And the answer was in the philosopher Thomas Aquinas. For those of you who are studying philosophy, you will know what this reference is. And you can look it up yourself. I'm not going to explain it. That's the reference in Aquinas. On play. What was the answer that he gave? The answer that Aquinas gave actually was the difference between work and play is that work is for a purpose. Play is not. Isn't that a wonderful answer? We work for money, we work to produce a work of art, and play is the relieving of the tension. For example, there's a legend about St. John the Evangelist that he scandalized someone one day because he was seen playing with some of his disciples. And this Pharisaical person said to him, why do you play? And he said, take your arrow and your bow. Now shoot the arrow into the sky. Did you enjoy it? Yes. Well, keep on doing it all day. Oh, he said, I would get tired. Well, he says, that's the way it is with any kind of work. The work has to be relieved by play, but play and work are related. Now, you find this in Scripture. In a very interesting passage. I've never seen a commentary on it. But the passage runs something like this. I was with the workman as he made the universe, playing before him all the day. Ludens coram eo omni tempore. Notice that there were two elements. First of all, the workman. I, who was I? I was wisdom, the one who becomes Christ. I was with him in the creation of the universe, playing with him all the day. Can the creation be play? We can understand how it can be work. So we speak of, he labored for 6 days making the world. Yes, creation was work. It was something serious. There had to be planets and universes and stars tumbling, as it were, from the fingertips of God. The blowing and the infusing of the law of gravitation into the material universe, so that all material things were drawn to the center of the earth. And then the other law in our own hearts drawing us up above. All of this was work. But where did the play come in creation? We know that he rested the seventh day, but here there's play. Playing before him. Why play? Because the playing or the making of the universe was not necessary. God was under no compulsion to tell the secrets of his being to nothingness. Love is always free. It's under no obligation. And that is why, when you're not under any obligation, when it's love, there's play. That's one of the reasons, too, why Isaac was recognized to be with his wife. He was playing. So that in the divine order, these two things always go together. Now, I mentioned Scripture. But did you know that this very same idea appears in a Greek philosopher over 4 centuries before Christ, namely the philosopher Plato? Plato, in his work Timaeus, pictures the Logos, that is to say, the divine mind. The Logos holding the universe in his hand and playing with it. That's where the representations of the Middle Ages came from. Remember, we've often seen works of art in which the divine child is pictured as having an apple in his hand. Well, the apple stood for the world. And here is the creator, the workman, playing with his world. As a poet has put it, swinging the world, a trinket at his wrist. One finds this idea in Cicero, the great orator. Cicero said, whenever you're giving a serious discourse, every now and then introduce play. Something light. Let it distract, but never completely disturb the gravity of the discourse. There was an American poet, Father Tabb, who, picking up this idea of Plato, of Logos holding the universe in his hand and playing with it, and saying that the Logos, God lost the little ball of earth and he came down to earth to find it again. Now, this idea, too, one finds also in Shakespeare. Shakespeare, in his, I think it's The Taming of the Shrew, says, haven't we any play to distract us from this terrible hour? The two, therefore, go together. Now, when they go together, we got a perfect picture of life. I haven't mentioned anything about the clown yet, have I? Don't worry, we got 14 minutes by the clock. We'll get to the clown. I'm saving that for the end. That's the light moment, you see, that Cicero said you introduce into a discourse. So that life really is made up of these two elements. It's made up of the tragic, and it's made up of the comic. Why does life have a serious side? You know why? It's because we have freedom. And freedom implies responsibility. And believe me, responsibility, which is the liberty to open certain doors and close others, produces the tragedy of life. But life also has a comic side, a lighter side. What is it? It's life. How often we say, it's great to be alive. There's joy in living. And so from the notion of play, we get a true concept of what is life, the tragic and the comic. Now we're getting closer to the clown, but not yet. Who best describes this combination of life, the tragic and the comic? Whom would you say? The comedians? Well, half and half. Most comedians either take the tragic or the comic. Now let us see how some great comedians of our times take this double aspect of life, of work and play, the tragic and the serious. Who would you say was a comedian who very well exemplified the tragic side of life? Jack Benny. Why? Jack Benny's always the victim. Everybody makes fun of him. He's the butt of every joke. He doesn't know what to answer, so it's looking out into empty space. He presents a picture of himself as being tight, which indeed he isn't. But that's the comedy side of the tragic life. And so he reveals this one side of life, namely that of being a victim. I saw him on one night with Billy Graham. And he was the victim of all of Billy Graham's jokes. Now, it could have been the other way, you know. But no, Jack Benny is the tragic character. Who's the comic? Who gets joy and thrills and sees the funny side of life? I would say Bob Hope. Isn't that right? Bob Hope is on top of everything. He's on top of the world. Political situation, find something to laugh at. Economic situation, something to laugh at. He can talk to soldiers and the seriousness of war. He's on top of that. And so he brings out the comic side of life. There's very few comedians have ever brought it out. Now, who depicts both sides? Now you know the answer, don't you? I told you. The clown, that's right. The clown. The clown is the man who combines within himself the serious and the light, the sad and the glad, the smile and the tears. He has both. Look at Emmett Kelly. Sad. Did you ever see anyone so sad? And he's typical of almost all clowns. But with that sadness there's also humor in the things that he does. A clown belongs to no social class. He doesn't belong, he belongs to the rich in a certain sense sometimes because he wears a top silk hat. But he belongs to the poor. Baggy trousers, and old shoes, toes out through the front. No one group can claim him. He depicts all of the contradictions of human life. He is the butt of jokes. Someone else carries a plank across the sawdust ring, hits the clown on the side of the face. He's always being knocked over. But he does the same to others. Why do we like the clown? We like the clown because he's a picture of what we are. We're so dignified, and yet we can make such fools of ourselves. We are so proud, and yet we can be so frustrated. We glory in our wealth, and yet we can be so impoverished. Charlie Chaplin was the great clown for a time. When he was the pilgrim, when he was the policeman, when he would pick up a pretty girl, go into a restaurant, not have enough money to pay the bill, he was funny. Here he was, Cain, he belonged to the gentleman class, baggy trousers, he didn't belong there. When did Chaplin lose his influence over an American and world audience? When he began to carry the red flag of revolution. When he got into modern times and became a kind of a social reformer and put himself in a certain class, he lost it all. So what does the clown do? I think the clown is maybe something like the God appearing in green pastures. He makes us ridiculous. He makes us laugh at ourselves. And there's only one time in Scripture where God is said to laugh. When was that? When he laughs at the atheists. When he laughs at those who say God is dead. God laughs. The clown is laughing at finite men who try to make themselves the infinite. He's laughing at the poor to make themselves rich. He's laughing at the rich who refuse to be poor. And God himself laughs in the same way. He laughs at man who's the carbon copy and calls himself the original. He laughs at man when he wants to be the pendulum without the clock. And so the one person in the world that is the great poor man's theologian is the clown. Now, because he reveals both sides of the tragic and the comic, let me tell you now what's happening in the world as we lose our love of clowns. We have people today dividing themselves into two classes, something like the comics. But the comics are still comics, so they have a place in the world. But there are those who take the tragic side of life. Who are they? There are many of our modern youth who are so sad with their long faces and long hairs like Job's seated on the dung heap. Not much laughter. They carry a flower, but they don't smile with the flower. Flower gives perfume, so do they, but they don't laugh at it. And so out of them comes what? Poetry of death. Songs of death. Murder. Killing. Out of it comes this side of life, the existentialists. Life has no meaning, no purpose, no goal. They cannot see the play side of the world. And these are the dramatists, to a great extent, of our modern world, who depict the sorry side and never the glad. Then what do we have on the other side? We have, on the play side, the playboy philosophy. There's nothing serious to life. I want to do it, that's it. They will to do everything they please, and then they get tired of doing what they please. These are the hedonists, whose law is pleasure. These are the pessimists. And this is the story of those who cannot see life as a whole, who cannot see that it involves a few tears, but also laughs. And I wonder if the right philosophy was not given the day that the Logos, or truth incarnate, said, "What doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his soul?" Lose his soul. That is the serious side of life. That's the work side. Work while you have the light. The other side? What does it profit if you gain the world, lose your soul? The world, that's the comic side. That's the light side. We mustn't make the secular too serious. In other words, the clown is right.
People of all faiths recognize Bishop Fulton J. Sheen as one of the greatest communicators of the 20th century. He was born in El Paso, Illinois, in May of 1896. As a young boy, he knew he wanted to be a priest. He served as an altar boy at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria, Illinois. At St. Viator College, his education and debating skills taught him the skills he used throughout his life. His unique ability at being natural and at ease in front of any audience was noted early in his ministry. He was ordained in 1919 and went on to become one of the best-known and greatly loved priests in church history. He wrote 96 books and hundreds of articles and columns. He broadcast numerous radio and TV programs. People from all faiths watched him on television because he spoke to every man. They always waited with joy for his goodbye, his blessing, "God love you." It continues to give us joy and memories.
Bye now, and God love you.
Bishop Fulton J. Sheen went to be with the Lord in December of 1979. Fulton J. Sheen, requiescat in pace.
Friends, I was once giving a sermon in a church, and a woman got up with her crying child, really shrieking, and left the church, and I said, "Madam, it's all right." So the child isn't bothering me. She says, "I know, but you're bothering the child." And I was giving a talk in Canada once on a Sunday, and I noticed that in the theater there were a number of people, men, taking up a collection. And when they finally came up to the front row, where I could see them very well, I leaned over and I said to one of them, I said, "What's the idea of taking up a collection during this lecture?" He said, "To get better speakers for next year." So I am not presenting myself as a model to you on how to talk. It's just merely that there have been so many letters coming to me asking me to give a few suggestions that I will give them to you. They are only personal. They may not apply to everyone, but I will give them to you for what they are worth. If I can talk now, I certainly couldn't always talk. There came a turning point in my life. It was in college when I was a freshman. I was on the debating team, which was in the college that I attended a great honor because they put a tremendous premium on debating. I thought I was good because, after all, I was picked as a freshman. I had to be good. And the night before the debate with Notre Dame University, the coach of our debating team, Father Bergen, called me over to his office, and he said, "You are the worst talker we've ever had in this college." Well, that was a terrible shock to me. I said, "Well, if I'm so terrible, why did you pick me on the team?" He said, "Because you can think, not because you can talk." But he said, "You're going to learn to talk before you leave this room. Take a paragraph out of that speech, any paragraph you like." I remember we were talking on the Merchant Marine. I'll never forget, the paragraph began, "I think it needs no argument to prove," and so forth. So he said, "Stand up there against the wall," which I did. Now he said, "Go over that paragraph." At the end of it, he said, "Do you see your mistake?" I said, "No." "Go over it again." Went over it 1 hour. 2 hours. 2 hours and a half. I was dead. So was he. And every 2 or 3 minutes, when I finished it, he would say, "Do you see your mistake?" I said, "No." But being naturally quick, after 2 hours and a half, I saw it. He said, "Do you see your mistake?" I said, "Yes, I think I do. I'm not natural. He said, "That's right. That's all." And he dismissed me. You notice how often speakers, as soon as they get up in a platform, or ministers or priests in the pulpit, everything changes, their voice changes, their attitudes, their poses. I think many prayers that we say we're not talking to God. We're talking to an audience, particularly prayers at banquets, and inaugurations and so forth. And we put on artificial poses. "Oh God, we ask thee to send down upon us thy benediction, thy blessing upon the sailors who are at sea, the merchants at their counting table, the lawyers at their bar." Well, that's not the way people talk. So, being natural and preparing a talk, what would be some suggestions? Now, the way I prepare a talk is not perhaps the way everyone would want to do it, but I can only give you my way. In order to prepare a talk, one must do a tremendous amount of reading. Each one of these telecasts of mine would represent between 20 and 40 hours of study. When I get through, what have I got? Nothing but a bits of yellow pages. I think I have one in my pocket. But before I show it to you, I will tell you what I do. I study, I do research, and I begin to understand the subject. Then, when it gets into my head, I begin to write out points. Generally just 3 or 4 points that I'm going to talk about. I will only write out the heading. And then I will tear up the paper. And then rethink what I was saying. So that when I prepare a telecast, there must be 20, 30 to maybe 100 pages that are torn up. And then the closer I get to the end, the smaller the pages are. This is this telecast. And I brought it out here, not because I'm going to refer to it, but just simply because it shows you the points, how small the points are. And by doing a tremendous amount of study, the mind creates an atmosphere for the talk. There is much more air round about us than ever gets into the lung. There's more food at the table than ever gets into our stomach. There are more things to see in nature than ever comes into the eye. And so when one rises to give a talk, one should have an atmosphere, a certain ambient knowledge round about that one can pull in this idea or that, as it were, from the air while you're talking. So that instead of writing out the speech, word for word beforehand, and then memorizing it like this, one thinks it from the head out. That's the reason you tear up the paper, so you don't have any information. You have to think it. Then you write down the ideas again. Well, by the time you get up to talk, you've already given the speech 10 or 15 times. And incidentally, it isn't a bad idea sometimes to talk out loud. If you can find a place in this day and age where you can walk and talk out loud without being counted crazy. How often, for example, students are asked to explain something. They think they know the lesson. When they get up, it's not there. And why? Because they were consecrated and dedicated to a dead page. Never went through their mind. Sometimes teachers are just textbooks wired for sound. And studying is nothing but but what is in print passing from the mind of the book to the notebook of the teacher, or rather from the notebook of the teacher to the notebook of the student without passing through the mind of either. Now, this method of preparation is not, is hard. It's very much easier to write something out and then to learn it than to do it this way. Sometimes if you do not feel well when you're giving a telecast or a lecture, thoughts do not come. You cannot always recall exactly what you had in your mind. But at any rate, there's a spontaneity. That's what people like. Even the mistakes you make. Now, one of the reasons, for example, why people like to have me draw is because everybody in the audience can draw better than I can. They feel they're far superior, and rightly so. So if I make a mistake in talking, fine. That's good. They say, I could do it just as well as that. And they can. This method, while it's harder and is a wonderful preparation for absorbing knowledge, has difficulties. One difficulty is that there are some people who give speeches who must write them out. For example, the President of the United States has to have his speeches written because every word is important. Then, too, there are some things that are not worth learning. John Barrymore, for example, would commit all the lines of Shakespeare by heart. But when he played in comedies and cheap movies and so forth, he absolutely refused to learn anything. He wanted helps outside. Now that's why people on television have to have aids that are outside. I do not use any kind of aid on the outside. If I read anything, I have it written out. Now there are two main props that are used in television. And the first prop is what is called an idiot card. An idiot card is something that is written out so that you'll not forget it. Now just suppose I were teaching you mathematics. Now I would be reading off this idiot card. And I would say to this vast television audience, 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 1 equals 3. 3 plus 3 equals 6. See, I don't forget it that way. Wonderful, isn't it? Now, you can... thank you for the idiot card. It was not an idiot that held it. It's only the card that's an idiot. And it's impossible for people who are constantly appearing, for example, on television, to study their lines or their commercials. And so they have to have them written out on these cards. But you can always tell, if you just look closely at anybody who's using an idiot card. This is generally the way. So do not be hard on them. If I were saying something that was not worth committing to study, I certainly would use one too. Now there's another prop which is better. And that is what is called a teleprompter. And a teleprompter will have a whole speech on it. For example, when you hear people giving speeches on television, 999 out of 1,000 are using a teleprompter if they do not have the paper before them. Many of the commercials which you hear are written on teleprompters. And a teleprompter rolls. Now, so I was watching a television show once where the teleprompter got caught. And that's kind of hard. Now, for example, if I were using a teleprompter and I didn't know my lines, now this is exactly what I would have written out. My name is Bishop Fulton J. Sheen. My address is 366 Fifth Avenue, New York. See, then I don't forget. Now, this is the teleprompter. These are some of the aids that are used in television, and television simply could not exist without them. And they are helpful, too, simply because one is apt to forget. Many times, you're standing before a television camera. Momentarily, I can't think of the next point. Well, I'll throw in a story or something till it comes back to me. You don't know it, but I do. I don't get too embarrassed. I don't get flustered because I can't remember it. I remember I was giving a talk once in Ireland at the Eucharistic Congress. I've forgotten when it was, a long time ago. If there was ever a time in my life I wanted to do well, it was then. And I was reciting a poem that I know just as well as I know the Our Father. And it was a poem written by an Irishman, Joseph Mary Plunkett. And the poem was, I see his blood upon the rose, and in the stars, the glory of his eyes. His body gleams amid eternal snows, his tears fall from the skies. I see his face in every flower. The thunder and the singing of the birds are but his voice. And carven by his power, rocks are his written words. And I forgot the next line. The reason I forgot was because I had said something before that the audience seemed to have taken politically. I didn't want it to have political significance. So while I was reciting this poem, I was giving myself an intellectual spanking. And I spanked myself so hard that when I got to the 9th line of this poem, I forgot. And I said to the audience, I forgot. Well, tremendous crowd there, tens of thousands of jaws dropped in disappointment. And when an Irish jaw drops, it collapses. So I had to get myself out of the difficulty. There came to me then a line of Patrick Henry. Not the one that you know. Patrick Henry also said something else. He said, when you're in difficulty in an oration, throw yourself into the middle of a sentence and trust to God Almighty to get you to the other end. And so I began. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I started. I said, I'm glad I forgot. So I didn't know how I was going to continue, so I started again. If I had ever wished to have forgotten anything, so I thought I'd give myself another jump on the springing board. If I had ever prayed to have forgotten anything, I should have prayed to have forgotten these lines of Joseph Mary Plunkett. I think there's beautiful symbolism in their forgetfulness. And that symbolism is that standing on the anvil of Ireland's soil, one should be able to hammer and forge out the sparks of his own poetry and not be dependent upon a magnanimous soul like Joseph Mary Plunkett. I got no credit for it afterwards because the audience said that was a great trick, pretending you forgot. It is always well to be prepared for such unexpected moments when you do forget. And even better still, when you're at a banquet and called upon to give a talk. And you have to begin with something that is not too heavy. In fact, one should always begin with something that's not too heavy. For example, you just simply cannot begin a speech by saying, ladies and gentlemen, accipitur frontalis, the convoluted convolutions, the metaphorical abicliarum pelviarum. That's a little too serious. You have to start with something that's common to the audience. Now, I think the best story of all for being called upon to talk without preparation and unexpectedly was the delightful story of G.K. Chesterton. He was called on and he said, He said, during the days of the persecution of the Christians, 2 Christians were out in the Colosseum. And some lions that had been released for 12 days, has been starved for 12 days, were released in their cages. They bounded out across the Flavian sands, were about to precipitate themselves upon the poor Christians. When the Christians reached out their arms, put them around the lion's neck, and began to say something in the lion's ear. Well, the emperor was furious. He came for blood, not comedy, because the lions went back again to their cages without touching the Christians. So the emperor, being furious, ordered other lions that had been starved for 4 weeks released. They bounded out after their prey, were about to precipitate themselves upon the Christians, and the Christians reached out their arms, put them around the lion's neck, whispered something in the lion's ear, and the lions left them and went back again to their cages. The emperor sent for the Christians. What are you doing to my starving lions? Nothing. Nothing but whispering something. But what do you whisper? The Christian said, we say, after this meal, you have to give a speech. So a preparation is the most important part of the talk. And then as regards delivery, what is important is sincerity, meaning what you say. Children are the best judges of anything that's heard on television. I do not mean dramas where there's an artificial emotional interest created. But children who may not understand what is being said, they know whether the speaker is sincere or not. Incidentally, that's a good word, sincere. When the Romans put up their many marble columns in their temples and their courts, they sometimes would find marble that had a flaw in it. So they would fill it up with wax and color it. Wax in Latin is cera. If they found a perfect marble that had no need of artificial filling, then it was called sine. In Latin means without wax, or sincere. This is about the only suggestion that I would give for delivery. One just simply feels what's in his heart, that's all. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. And one must not be too long. It's always better to have an audience say, I wished he talked longer, than to have them say, he had 3 good chances to quit. And then in the communication of any idea, the secret of a good talk is the secret of fire. Fire has 2 qualities, heat and light. The light corresponds to the truth. The heat corresponds to the zeal, to the passion, to the fire. And the fire and the passion come always from the truth. When one is on fire with anything, and really believes in it, all the words come out naturally. And above all things else, the making of an orator, too, is really on his knees. Because the power to make an audience feel what you're saying does not come just from these fires. It comes from fires that have been stolen from heaven and given to the speaker. This is influence. This is power.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.
That camera has one eye out, only one little red light there. It's all right, don't... There are generally two little red lights on top of the camera. That one little red eye is out. It must have been out last night. The subject of this telecast is patriotism. I will give you the meaning of the title in a moment. This is a story about patriotism in the year 2024. A woman was elected President of the United States. The reporters approached the husband and said, "How do you feel about the election?" He said, "I regret that I have only one wife to give to my country." That has two eyes. The title, Quo Vadis America. I am giving this title, writing it down, for the sake of only 3 of you in the entire audience in the United States. Only 3. For the 3 of you who do not know Latin. Quo Vadis America. If you have ever been to Rome, you may have visited a chapel just outside of Rome. It was erected over a spot where, according to legend, Peter was in flight from persecution in Rome. And on the road, he saw a vision of the Lord approaching him. And Peter said to him, "Quo vadis, Domine?" "Where are you going, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I am going to Rome to be re-crucified." In other words, Peter, that's where you should be. Well, we've chosen that title. Instead of Quo Vadis Domine, Quo Vadis America. America, where are you going? Where are we going in this day and age? Do you know one of the most unused words that we have in our vocabulary is the word patriotism? Hardly ever hear it anymore. Patriotism is a virtue that was allied to the old virtue of the Greeks and Latin called pietas. Pietas meant love of God, love of neighbor, love of country. And when one goes out, all go out. When we no longer have love of God, we have no longer have love of country. We're going to investigate in a particular way today the problem of revolution. We started our country with a revolution. Revolution is in the air today. As a matter of fact, the revolutionists of our day are all arguing and contending that, well, we started that way, therefore we should continue it. So, let us now investigate this question. Namely, we do live in America in a revolutionary tradition, certainly. But the question is, what kind of a revolution should we have? What kind of a revolution? There are two kinds. One, the kind we started with, the other, the kind we have today. What was the kind we started with? Well, I can tell it in the story of an old soldier who had fought at Concord. And someone said to him in his old days, "Why did you go to Concord on that April day? You suffered great oppression, didn't you?" And old Colonel Preston said, "No, I wasn't conscious of any great oppression from a foreign power." "Well, then, it's because you were against the Stamp Act." "Oh, I never saw any of the stamps. I think that General Bernard kept some of them in Castle William, but I never saw them. I certainly didn't fight on account of the Stamp Act." "Well, then you revolted on account of the tea tax." "I never drank a cup of tea in my life. I wasn't interested in the tax." "Well, then you must have been reading Harrington, Sidney, and Locke." "Never read them. All I ever read was the Bible, Watt's hymns, and the Catechism." "Well, then, why did you go to Concord?" He said, "For one reason. In order that we might govern ourselves." That was the American Revolution. To govern ourselves. Now, what's the revolution of today? What's its nature? Violence. Violence just for the sake of violence. That is ours. I mean, not ours. Please God, not any of ours. You or me. But I mean the new type of revolt, which involves destruction of everything that is in the past. And these people who are actuating violence today claim they're in the line of the American Revolution. They are not. Now let me go more into detail. These two types of revolution. Each of these had a character at the head who symbolized the revolutions. The one who best expressed the principles of the American Revolution was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is the antecedent of all Americans today who believe in self-government. Who's the progenitor of this kind of revolution? Someone who was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson. Strange to say. Saint-Just. 1793, revolution. Saint-Just and all who were associated with him in that revolution. Now let me tell you the difference between the two. And here we'll have a review really in pietas and in patriotism. And I will first of all describe what Jefferson taught us, what we believe, what are the conditions of the preservation of our country. Then I will give you Saint-Just, who holds exactly the same thing that the violent revolutionists of today hold in our country. They may not know that they are adopting his principles, but they are. Thomas Jefferson probably knew Saint-Just. They were in Paris together. But in order to do our American Constitution, Thomas Jefferson had to repudiate all of the principles of Saint-Just, whether he knew Saint-Just or not. See what wonderful work the angel does. Knows when to clean, when not to clean. Angel Clean, he's known as, not as Mr. Clean. Let's review the principles upon which our democracy was founded. Then let's review Saint-Just. Thomas Jefferson founded our democracy upon two principles. One, the dignity of man. Secondly, I will just simplify it, all rights and liberties come to us from God. I will explain these, and then we will go to Saint-Just. Without telling a word to my angel, he'll know very well that he shouldn't clean the board at this point. Thomas Jefferson. First, he believed that the government must be founded upon the respect for the individual. So he investigated what are the source of our rights and liberties. Where do they come from? Where does my right of free speech come from? Or the right of assembly, or any other right we have? From the will of the majority? If it did, the will of the majority could take away the will of the minority. Jefferson intended that the majority would be the custodian of minority rights. The rights and liberties come from the federal government? Certainly not. If they came from the federal government could take them away. Taking almost everything else away. We might just as well take away our rights and liberties. But he set it down in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence that it is a self-evident principle, self-evident, that the Creator, has endowed man with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable. They cannot be taken away. Among which are the right to life, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is our democracy. Those are the two principles. And isn't it interesting that that particular government and those governments in the world that deny the existence of God are those that deny the existence of human rights? Now, let's go to Saint-Just. What did Saint-Just, and along with him Royer, what was their principle? Their principle was that in order to make people pass through a certain door, there was only one way to do it, and that was the way of terror. Confiscation of property, and the destruction of rights and liberties. Saint-Just also said, a people can be taught to save themselves only by violence. And the path to the establishment of every government must be upon a pile of corpses. That was the thing that Jefferson had to fight against when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He knew it. Wasn't anything new. I'm bringing it up now to remind you that we're going through exactly that same crisis now that Jefferson faced. That our country today has to choose once more between Jefferson and Saint-Just. Which are we going to choose? We're familiar enough with the principles of Jefferson. So I'm going to enumerate for you. It'll be easy to identify the new type of violence that's sweeping our country, our schools, our streets. And I'm going to describe three characteristics. The first characteristic of the new violence of our day is what we will call elitism. Now, this word, I don't know whether it exists or not, but it's the only way that I can describe it. It's taken from the word elite. There used to be a virtuous elite, a core of heroes and saints that very much influenced any culture and democracy. The new elite practices what is called elitism. Namely, there is a dominant minority that makes a lot of noise and that uses violence to force its will upon others. They're revolutionists without a program. They have no flag. They only know what they're against. They do not know what they're for. And taking some words out of Toynbee, they're made up of two groups. Toynbee said the first group was conqueror. I would call one of the groups the man with the bullhorn. He's always the leader. You just watch in any violent group today that follows the principle of Saint-Just, what's the man with the bullhorn? He's the leader of that revolt. Secondly, there are the hangmen, the kind that will rifle desks, destroy property. burn homes, do anything to enforce their will. And then there are the wastrels, the group that just profit from violence, confiscate property to be in on the violence. That's the first group. I have 6 minutes and 7 seconds. So be patient. You'll have to wait about 6 minutes for a commercial, let me tell you, too. Second, mysticism. This is another new characteristic of the revolution. Mysticism is a term that belongs to religion. It doesn't belong, actually, in the field of politics, but it's been transposed to politics. Now, what was mysticism? Mysticism was it could best be expressed in the mysticism of John of the Cross. Todo y nada. In other words, God or nothing. Now, you give yourself to God completely, or else you give nothing. This was spiritual mysticism. The political mysticism is, of course, there is no God. It's my will or nothing. This is what the elite insists upon. No alternative, no compromise. So they would make, in this mysticism, a tabula rasa. They would wipe the slate clean of anything that opposes them. And then after they destroyed life and property, they would ask for an amnesty and immunity. Thirdly, this is not my term. You could very well accuse me of having invented it. I've often thought of giving a telecast on it, but the other day I went into the 10-volume history of Toynbee. And lo and behold, I found Toynbee saying that idea which has been in my mind, namely Satanism. Satanism is behind it, too. This is the third characteristic of it. The world is built on order. There's a plan. So scientists are able to discover the laws of the universe. And in discovering the laws of the universe, men find harmony. This harmony and order had to come from somewhere. It came from God. What is the essence of Satanism? The essence of Satanism is the destruction of that order. The order of law, the order of morality, order of religion, the order of ethics, anything that you please. This is Saint-Just in our day. Believe me, fellow Americans, I tell you that before the flood, in the book of Genesis we read, and in the days of Noah, there was violence on the earth. All of the violence that happens in our country is a fever graph. Read it. And it points to a decay in our civilization. How are we going to get out of it? The reason I'm hesitating here is just because there's so many ideas that I have to choose in the few minutes that are left which one to give you. I tell you one thing that we have to do. We have to realize maybe why the eagle is our national symbol. The eagle always builds its nest high in the mountain crevices. When the young are hatched, the eagle pushes its young over the nest. And they fly down to what to eaglet eyes must seem like sudden death. And just before the young eagle crashes, the mother eagle swoops down from its nest, down to the abyss, and catches the young, and then flies up into the sky, swoops from out it again, and repeats the process until the bird has learned to fly. Moses saw that, and he wrote, "As the eagle stirs among the young, so does God stir among the nations." Maybe God is stirring us, bringing us to the brink of danger, in order that we might begin to examine ourselves and restore Jefferson, the dignity of man, and a belief in God. Our nation is too full of those that are crying down. Down with the universities, down with schools, down with the churches, down with teachers, down with government, down with the police. Can you build anything down? You cannot. Certainly time in our nation to change our words. And let's begin now to use the word up. Up from all of this filth. Up from this violence. Up from this indifference of courts. Up. Up to the hid battlements of eternity. Up. Up to God. I've got a half hour more to tell you about this subject, but we haven't time, so just bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people.